Hello and welcome. My name is Amy Stoff. Thank you for joining me for my PowerPoint presentation on teaching the National Core Arts Standards as a classical art educator. Now, if you are new to teaching at a classical school, you may be wondering how you can teach the national standards. And since you're probably not required to use the standards, maybe you're wondering, should I use the standards at all? Well, I will be making the argument that yes, you should be using the standards for two main reasons. One, they will give you a framework to begin your lesson plans from. And also, they will enable your students to engage in meaningful discussions and participation in the arts with all people, no matter what type of education they've had. And this is something that they can and should be doing the rest of their lives. The standards lay a common ground and a base of knowledge for everyone. But teaching these standards may look different in a classical setting than it looks in other schools. Because that which is valued in classical education is very specific. So let's define what classical education is. Let's go over a couple aspects of classical education that I will be focusing on for this presentation. The first thing that defines classical education is the use of the trivium, meaning the grammar or lower school stage, and then the logic stage or middle school stage, and the high school or rhetoric stage. Now, each of those stages has a special thing that sort of defines it. If you want more information on that, I would just Google classical education. That's really basic. You'll get good information that way. I don't have time to go into what each of those is, but today I will be focusing on the logic stage because I only have time to do a thorough examination of one stage in this one presentation. So in the logic stage, students learn how to use logic, how to develop an argument that makes sense, and in our case, how to put together an artistic piece that makes sense and sends the message that it is intended. Second is that it teaches virtue. So in art, we want to learn not just what art is out there, but what makes art good. There's a focus on quality here. Thirdly, it is language focused. This can be a little hard in a visual discipline, but there are ways to incorporate lots of wonderful language into your study of art. Fourth, history is valued. In classical schools, we are all about learning from those who have come before us. So we study the old masters, that canon of Western art, and we see what we can learn from it. We see how we can emulate it. You have to love art history to teach at this type of school. And lastly, it is rigorous. We push our students to achieve all that they are capable of. And so sometimes in an art class, we have to say, I know you didn't put forth your best effort here into this piece, so please give it a second look, try again. So for our first area of artistic literacy, we're looking at creating. Our anchor standard for this is number 3, refine and complete artistic work. In the creating process, you're basically taking an idea and turning it into a physical work of art, all the way up through the final revision of it. So I always have the students in the logic phase create 3 different sketches for their project, 3 different ideas, and then we sit down together and we refine the ideas, we talk about them, and we choose the best one, and they move forward with that one. From there, I teach them how to improve upon their work. This goes back to the idea of academic rigor and teaching quality. It's not enough to just do something. I want to teach them how to do it well so that it looks beautiful. So when they think they're done, they check in with me and I give them more feedback. When I'm teaching techniques, I have step-by-step examples. Over to the right of this slide, you will see what this looks like in practice. In this project, we're copying the girl with the pearl earring. So I show them how to draw it step by step, and then I also use it as a way to teach them dry pastel technique. All the while, I'm talking them through the steps, which is a good way to incorporate language. The performance standard that this process most exemplifies is CR 318A, applying relevant criteria to examine, reflect on, and plan revisions for a work of art or design in progress. We're teaching them how to improve upon their designs. And so as an assessment for this one, rubrics are great. Make sure you get the criteria on there that you want to assess and tell the students ahead of time what you're looking for. Since the creation process emphasizes improving based on feedback, you could assess at an early stage and then again at a later stage so that you can look for that improvement. Next, we move on to presenting. Our anchor standard here is number 6, convey meaning through the presentation of artistic work. Students in the logic phase love to create artworks with meaning. They're just on the cusp at this stage of moving from concrete to abstract reasoning. This is actually a great exercise in using logic for them, sort of developing a logical visual representation of an abstract idea. We employ symbolism, which is mentioned in the standards as well. This is the stage where I begin to teach them the principles of design. I have a project where they look at Picasso's Guernica, and I tell them the story behind the creation of that work. And they are asked to then choose a social issue or historical event that they feel passionate about. And using charcoal, create a drawing about it. We talk about how the contrast principle of design, that stark black and white medium of charcoal lends itself really well to representing these very serious issues. The performance standard for this one is PR 517A, based on criteria, analyze and evaluate methods for preparing and presenting art. This particular project is one that is almost wasted if you don't display it. These pieces want to be talked about and engaged with, so we do display them, and we talk about what kind of orientation would be best for viewers to be able to see each piece and really think about each one individually. And when these are up at the art show, it does make quite a statement. For assessing presentation, you could use a rubric, but for some sort of finished body of work like a portfolio or a matted piece for an art show, alternatively, a critique would be a great opportunity for them to articulate how they conveyed meaning through their artwork. You could grade students on how they presented their work, how they talked about it and expressed it verbally. Now we move on to responding, and our anchor standard here is number 9, apply criteria to evaluate artistic work. This is where the characteristics of teaching virtue really come in. When we're looking at art, what constitutes beauty, truth, and goodness? I believe that to be able to do that, you need to teach students the language of art criticism. When you're looking at the Baroque period, for example, and you see a gilded sculpture with rays of golden light shining down from heaven and a person is being swept away on a cloud, that's opulent. Well, what does opulent mean? That becomes a vocabulary word. You have to define that for them and use it over and over again so that they really understand it. Responding is very language-based. To me, responding is all about learning how to talk about art. Once they have some terms like that under their belts, you can assign essays with questions like, tell me how Klaus Oldenburg's soft sculptures exemplify the values of pop art. and they can do it, provided you have told them what those values are and how to look for them in artwork. The performance standard for this one is RE918A. Create a convincing and logical argument to support an evaluation of art. So they're getting to use their logic skills. They're looking critically at art and asking, in what ways is this a great work of art? How does it maybe fall short in other areas? The logic stage is a great place to introduce these kinds of questions. And as an assessment, like I mentioned, essays are great to find out whether they can respond to artwork, or even an oral exam, anything that gets them talking about art. Our last area of artistic literacy is connecting, and that's anchor standard number 11, relating art to history. For this, in a classical setting, we're going to use the quadrivium, which is something that is somewhat unique to classical ed. And it basically just means dividing history up into 4 main epochs and studying one per year, so that you end up studying each epoch once per stage, or 3 times over your 12 years of schooling. So I always try to line up my art history with the history that they're getting in their main classes. So to teach art history, one of my favorite things to use is a very classical method indeed, which is the Socratic questioning method. This basically just means asking the students very intentionally formed questions in order to get at some truth. So if I was to show this painting, Van Gogh's Irises, if I had already covered some sort of realistic genre painting that came before this in history, I might ask the students, what are some things that are important to realist painters? And one of them might be gradual blending technique of on soft edges. And then I would ask, has Van Gogh used gradual blending on these flowers? No. What's going on? Do you think this type of work was appreciated by the Academy at the time? And from there, I could get into his use of color and the fact that he was a self-taught painter influenced by the Impressionists, and that he basically did everything wrong according to the rules of realistic painting at the time. And he painted the world as he saw it in his mind, with all sorts of mess and beauty. And years later, only after he died, people started to look at his work and they got it and they loved it. And now he's one of the most well-loved painters of all time. And it's because of his unique vision in the world, of the world. When I am teaching my students art history, I love to present it as a story. I'm really inspired by Simon Schama's series, The Power of Art, which can also be found on YouTube. He's so good at making you understand the work and the cultural context through story. And that is what I seek to do. One caution though, it is not all student appropriate, so don't just show the videos in class. The performance standard that we're bringing out here is CN 1116A, analyzing how art reflects changing times, traditions, resources, and cultural uses. There's so much that you can do with this. You really can use this method I've described here with any work of art. And so for an assessment for this, I think that a test or content quiz is really appropriate here. Make sure to do a lot of review, and I would actually print the test out ahead of time at the beginning of the unit so that you know what you want to test them on, what knowledge you want them to have, so that you can be reviewing that important information throughout the whole unit. Finally, lifelong goals. Under the arts as culture, history, and connectors, it says, artistically literate citizens know and understand artwork from varied historical periods and cultures, and actively seek and appreciate diverse forms and genres of artwork of enduring quality and significance. And I think that really sums up what I want for my students. You know, whether they enter the arts as their field ultimately or not, I want them to have the world of art opened for them because it adds so much richness to anyone's life. Even if they're not making art themselves, I want them to know about and enjoy art because fluency in the arts is a powerful piece of what it means to be a lifelong learner. I believe that to truly be a lifelong learner, you have to be a lifelong creator, and that is what I want for my students. And I try to give them just one little piece of that puzzle in the logic phase of my art classes. That concludes my presentation, and if you are an art educator and you have a question or need help with a problem that I've addressed here, would you please leave me a comment in the questions and comment section down below. I always appreciate feedback as I'm looking to constantly improve my content. And of course, I want to help you with the information that I've learned in this course. And then the very, very last slide will be my sources. Thank you so much for listening.